Greetings, everyone. It's nice to see everybody here today. I guess we're the outcasts since we don't go up to Dover, but that gives us a little bit more freedom, if you will. We don't have to... No, that's how it goes. I know sometimes it's not always easy, and I'll admit that even though we've been here this long, I haven't made it over to Dover yet, and today was not going to be that day either. Have you not been there, Ricky?
50 years, still hasn't been.
Okay. Well, I have something to achieve towards then. Well, I hope you all had a great week. We did as well. As I shared with some of you, we started yesterday morning at the beach in Florida and put in about 15 and a half hours of driving and got in late last night. And it was a long day, to say the least. But boy, I tell you, driving up through Alabama as the sun's coming up, and there was a little bit of fog, just knee-high fog on the ground. Some of those horse farms, just rolling hills and the fences and the horses. If I hadn't had at 14 hours of drive ahead of me at that time, I might have stopped and taken a picture, but I'll hold it up here and appreciate God for sharing it with us. I'm going to tell you about a car, because I like cars. In high school, one of my buddies, Joe, had a 1973 Buick Electra. It was gifted to him from his grandmother. It was a four-door, of course, 455. Big beast of a car. I was one of probably 3 or 4 kids in the whole school who thought it was awesome. And everybody else was like, look at your grandma's car. And I'm like, let me see the engine. And now at the time, I had an old 63 Impala, but I had been a young teenager not recognizing the symptoms that it drank more oil than I put in it. And one day we found the end of the oil container. And so the engine seized up, and I was in need of a new vehicle, and I was wanting an old car. And so I liked his a lot, don't get me wrong. And so I started looking for an old car. And then as we started moving towards graduation, this friend of mine was going to pursue a career in accounting, and he decided that he would rather have a car that got better gas mileage than that tank. And he offered to sell it to me. I was pumped. Man, was I pumped. And the car was just a little bit less than what I had received for my high school graduation gifts. So I was able to buy that car with cash, and it didn't really need anything at the time but a scrawny 18-year-old to drive it. So I drove that car until my sophomore year of college. But when I was a freshman in college, I drove it to work, and I worked in downtown Wichita. On South Broadway, if you're familiar with Wichita, it's not a real nice part of town. We would regularly have vagrants and other folks come up through there. One day after work, because I'd go to college in the daytime, go to work at night, and I would leave work about 8 o'clock, I was pulling out of the parking lot, and some fellows flagged me down in my car. And they said, hey, man, you want to sell your car? And I was like, well, that depends. How much do you want for it? They're like, well, we work for this guy who always looking for old cars that we can customize for him and offer nice money and all that for it. And I was like, well, hey, this is all right. And they were in a decent, newer, large sedan, seemed like decent fellas, I thought at the time. So I was showing them the car. They asked me to start it up. And then as I started up, one of the guys said, hey, what's this back here? And I went back there, and one of them hopped in the driver's seat and took off in my car. I had all my school books in there, all my homework, my cell phone, my wallet, all of that. And I remember watching them drive away and thinking, like, there's just no way this is actually happening. And I cried aloud to God. I said, God, please no. That's literally what I said. God, please no. That's all I could say. And I watched as my car went away. I started walking back to work because I was a few blocks from there. And I hear it, and it's coming towards me. The guys get out of the car, and I'm thanking them profusely, and they won't talk to me. I start walking towards my car, and they go across the road away from me. I don't know what God did that day, but I know God did something for me that day. I believe there was somebody who may have popped up out of the back seat and scared them, or they may have had They may have saw what was a cop car driven by an angel. I do not know. I'm going to tell another story about someone. His name was Lester Joseph Gillis. He was born in 1908 in Chicago, Illinois, to very poor parents. As a teenager in the early 1920s, he took to stealing cars. He was very good at it. He had a quick temper. He wanted a lot for his life. He wanted to be taller. And in his short lifespan, he stole the equivalent of over $10 million in modern funds. At age 25 in 1934, after killing 3 FBI agents and at least 3 others that they knew, Babyface Nelson was killed. He was kicked out of Al Capone's gang for being too violent. This message is about number 10, coveting. Babyface Nelson all started out with coveting the cars of others, the wealth of others, and it ended his life at age 25. I wanted my friend's Buick, and I paid for it. Somebody else wanted my Buick and took it from me. God brought it back to me, and I still owe him one for that. I can't wait till he tells me how he did that. Our nature is to be covetous. We want, and we want, and we want, and we want. And it's important that we recognize that this behavior has to be dealt with. And that's why Christ himself spoke these words into the tablet, or inscribed these words into the tablet, because it's an issue. Quite frankly, brethren, the reason the 10 Commandments are given to us is because God knows who we are, and God knows what tools Satan will use to draw us away from him, and he has told us, this is the way. This is how you stay close to me. For us to overcome the covetous nature that we have, we are required to have a mindset of contentment. And so to follow the commandment of thou shalt not covet, we shalt be content. And it is through gratitude that we find that. We can't start this topic without reading the exact verses here. So let's go to Exodus 20. And verse 17. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. The Hebrew word for covet, I don't want to spit on the microphone, so I won't say it, means desire, take pleasure in. And the neighbor means friend, fellow, or companion. Now, desire is not always bad. Desire, quite frankly, is a huge motivator. It's important that we have proper desires, and that's what I'm going to address today. The desire to take something from someone else, to have something that someone else has, and then in doing so they will not have it, is covetousness. I mean, Les wanted a nice big orange truck and he went out and bought it. That's not improper. But if Les wanted a nice orange truck and he went and sabotaged his neighbor who had one to cause him problems to somehow end up with it for a steal or a cheap, that's probably the wrong way about going about things. And I do like that orange pickup, Les. So it's about taking something from someone else. We are to desire God. We are to want him to be a part of our life. We are to take pleasure in the blessings that he pours out upon us. But let's turn to James chapter 4. James chapter 4 and verse 2. It says, you lust and you do not have, you kill and desire to have and cannot obtain, you fight in war yet you do not have because you ask not. And you ask and receive not because you ask amiss, that you may consume it upon your lusts. It is our nature to move in those directions. One of the things that I thought interesting, and I won't turn there real quickly, as I was meditating on this, I was thinking about when Christ came and was expounding upon the law at his message in the Sermon on the Mount, and he was sharing with the brethren about the spiritual aspect of the Ten Commandments. I would present to you, brethren, that this 10th commandment is part and parcel of what Christ was saying to them at that time. When he said, you look at a woman with lust, you have already committed adultery in your mind. He was calling them out for the covetous nature of the way that they had applied the law. That coveting is what leads to theft. Coveting is what leads to adultery. Coveting leads to murder. Coveting leads to all these other things. And I think as I was thinking about this message and putting this together, I realized that of the actions that are forbidden in the Ten Commandments, beyond the thou shalt and remember the Sabbath day, honor thy father, all these thou shalt nots are direct actions except the covetousness, which is a thought that leads to those improper actions. And so even in the Ten Commandments, Christ gave us a mental aspect to the fulfillment that he would bring in the totality of the law that he would share with us later in that Sermon on the Mount. Let's look at Proverbs 27 as well. And mind you, that last bit is just my take on it. Christ didn't say it, so it's not gospel. Proverbs 27 and verse 20. Hell and destruction are never full. And the word there for hell is a reference to the grave. And so the eyes of man are never satisfied. Solomon recognized that we will want, and we will want, and we will want, and we will want more and more. Ecclesiastes 5. And verse 10. He that loves silver shall not be satisfied with silver, and he that loves abundance with increase, and this is vanity. We're never satisfied. I've never met anyone who said, I can't use any more money. Matter of fact, the people that have the most seem to demand the most and want more and more and more and more. It's a fruitless component of our flesh. It leads to nothing. We see hoarding is an example of the want that never stops. And it can be, some people hoard money and other people hoard plastic bags. And trust me, I've seen them both. It's a disturbing component of ourselves. And if we have an improper approach to this, it can certainly harm our relationship with God. I won't turn there, but Proverbs 28:25 says, a greedy man stirs up strife, but the one who trusts in the Lord will be enriched and have fullness. Psalm 37:4 says, take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart, if appropriate. So if our nature is to be always desiring more and never satisfied, which I think is a good thing God put in us, because before our modern blessed times, and we are truly blessed, those people had to work hard just to eat. And that drive within us to store up and to make sure that we have provisions for the future is appropriate. It's appropriate to plan for the future. It's not appropriate to do so at the detriment of others or one's own soul in violation of God's law. So therefore, we should strive to be content and pleased with what we have. If anyone has traveled to a third world country, it makes it hard to hear the constant refrain of the poor amongst us. The most impoverished in the United States of America are better off than 80, 90, maybe even 95% of the rest of the world. And yet we hear constantly, you owe me this, you owe me that. You know, we shouldn't have to pay for cell phones. We shouldn't have to pay for internet. We shouldn't have to pay for houses. We shouldn't have to pay for cars of those in our own society who are living really, really well. When you look on the streets of big cities around the world, there are no public systems that provide shelter and food. Many of the homeless outside of the United States of America are on their own. And sometimes we don't recognize that because we live in this land of such abundance. But in this abundance, we seem to be a people that's not yet satisfied. You know, there's an old quote that says, comparison is the thief of joy. And that's kind of what it comes down to. If we're always wanting more, we're saying what I don't have is enough and I want as much as this guy or that lady or that person or this person. I will say that as I've aged, watching those that have the most makes me want it less and less every day. Those amidst us who have amassed obscene wealth don't live a life that I desire at all. And there never seems to be enough. Hebrews 13. Let's turn over there. Hebrews 13 and verse 5. Here Paul's giving us some instructions. It says, let your conversation or your conduct be without covetousness, and be content with such things as you have, for he has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. In Luke 12, Christ's own words here echo a similar sentiment. Luke 12, verse 14. Actually, we'll start in verse 13. And one of the company said to him, Master, speak to my brother that he divide the inheritance with me. And he said to him, Man, who made me a judge or divider over you? He said to them, Take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consists not in the abundance of the things which he possesses. Those are the words of Jesus Christ. Some who speak that if we love Christ, that we'll be wealthy and have jets and all these things, that health and wealth gospel, that's not what Christ said. He's like, our life does not consist in the abundance of the things we possess. I can't remember the name of the song, but I remember hearing the music lyrics one time, and it says, whenever you get before the Lord, he's not going to ask how much you saved, he's going to ask how much you gave. And so it's important for us not to build a big storehouse for ourselves while our neighbor is starving. The very first verse of Psalm 23 is, The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, or I shall have need of nothing. And even in the Lord's Prayer in Matthew 6:11, we're asked only Christ says, ask for your daily bread, not for the field, not for the bread shop, not for the oven, just that bread, that food for the day. That's what is most important, not too much past that. And in Philippians, Paul in Philippians 4, Paul in Philippians 4 and verse 11 said, Now, not that I speak in respect of desire, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. I know how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Paul recognized that our possessions aren't going to get us on down the road here. Matter of fact, In many circumstances, our possessions can harm us more than they can help us. And ultimately, if we don't have God, there's no point in having any of it. And we see a lot of people on this earth who have put their possessions in the place of God and devoted their entire life, being, and everything within them to increasing that. Verse 19 here in Philippians 4 says, "But my God shall supply all your need according to his riches in glory by Christ Jesus." I won't go there, but we're familiar with the scriptures that Christ says, why are you worried about what you eat or drink? Life is more than that. The food on your plate and the clothes on your body are not the most important things. You're more valuable than that, and I take care of the birds, and I take care of the flowers. I saw a meme very recently where it was a person talking to an orangutan, and the person said, "Ha, you stupid orangutan, you're not wearing clothes, and yet you walk upright like me." And of course the orangutan spoke back and says, "You're literally the only animal that pays to live here." So God does provide for every living thing on the face of the planet, and human beings are the ones that think we need to exchange gold for it. And don't get me wrong, it's important to work for what we have, but it just kind of puts things in perspective that God is taking care of everything without a bank, without loans, without interest rates, without permits, central planning, or any of those things. He's caring for every organism in this world and universe. We have no need to worry about those things. Let's turn to Proverbs chapter 30. Here Solomon is sharing some additional good wisdom. We'll start in verse 8. "Remove from me vanity and lies. Give me neither riches nor poverty. Feed me with food convenient for me, lest I be full and deny you and say, 'Who is the Lord?' Or lest I be poor and steal and take the name of my God in vain." Our desire should be for what we need. And we should trust God to provide us with what we need, because when we look around, I do have all that I need. I'm clothed, I'm fed, I'm sheltered. I have abundance beyond measure when I really consider what God has blessed me with beyond what I need. Over this last week, spending time with my family in the beautiful state of Florida, the water was crystal clear, and we're watching the sea rays swim up and down the shore. There was a few times that I was literally overwhelmed, just feeling how blessed God has given so much that I deserve none of it. All I do is sit here in my skin being like, I wonder what my skin can do today to separate me from God, because that's what it seems like day in and day out, that I'm fighting myself to try and achieve these things that man says are great, and God's over here like, "I've got you covered. What do you need? You got everything you need. A beautiful house, a beautiful family." And even in the times of my life that I had the least quote unquote abundance, it's always been rich, very rich. I've never had to wonder where a next meal was coming from. I know some people have. I've never had to wonder if God was going to take care of me, because he has. Now, there have been times the bank account's been low, but he tends to work those things out miraculously. Let's go back to 1 Timothy. In chapter 6. This is a really cool verse, because it's almost a riddle in itself in these few words here in verse 6 of Timothy 6. "Godliness with contentment is great gain. We brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. And having food and clothing, let us be therewith content. But they that will be rich fall into a temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many arrows. But you, O man of God, flee these things and follow after righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, and meekness. I just think it's really interesting in verse 6 that godliness with contentment is gain. So if we seek gain without God, it's loss. If we're pleased with what we have with Him, it's gain. That's cool. I like it when God does things like that, because he flips our innate perception of things and the way that our human mind works, and he shows us the truth. And that is truth, even though it goes against what our skin thinks it should be, what we're continually impressioned with from the media sources around us. You need a bigger house, you need a nicer car, you need all the best clothes. What do you mean you haven't had plastic surgery yet? We don't need any of those things. Quite frankly, aging is good. I mean, we're supposed to. None of us need to be dancing around pretending like we're 20-year-olds. I don't want to be 20 again. I hope you don't either. Except you, Joel. You still got to get there. And you fellas in the back, too. But that obsession with youth and that jealousy of those that have it, that's not what we're here for. We're here to glorify God. He made us in His image, and getting old is part of the ride. And there's a wisdom that comes in that. And if we're trying to avoid the physical appearance of age, what's that saying about what's happening on our inside? Are we refusing wisdom too? And I'll admit, many of the people I know that have gone overboard on healthcare matters, trying to make themselves look young, wisdom is often lacking. So a contented mind is the mind that does not covet. The contented mind says, I have all that I need, and I'm glad that my neighbor has what he has too. I have a very good friend. I've talked to you all about him a number of times here. His dad gave me a piece of advice long ago at his wedding. We stepped out in the parking lot to have a visit. And I have one friend in my friend group who was very, very successful early on. He's one of those people that has the Midas touch. And he came from a measure of privilege, so I mean, he did start on second or third base, if you will. But even still, he worked hard, and he got far along the way in career earlier than myself and some of my peers. And at a time, I was like, well, that doesn't seem fair. Like, we both started at the same place. And then I had this conversation with my friend's dad, and we weren't even talking about this other matter, but he straightened me out. He said, long ago, I decided that I wanted all my friends to be better off than me. And he said, and I've really committed to that. And the more I have dwelt on that, that is an ethos that I live by now too. I do want all my friends to be better off than me. I want to celebrate their successes rather than saying, well, why not me, Lord? And because God's like, well, that's not your path, son. That's for them. I can't give you everything I've given everybody else, because then what would I give them? It's really kind of foolish if we truly desire what God has given someone else. It doesn't make any sense. We look at people and we look at their looks, we look at their house, we look at their family, we look at their faith. And we desire those things because it looks good from afar, but God's working with everybody so uniquely and individually. What we're not seeing are the challenges sometimes that they face. And sometimes we say, whoa, I want that thing that so-and-so has. Well, you're not seeing the price they're paying in the background for it. And in some circumstances, you really don't want that. Especially when it comes to people living above their means with the new car, the new house, and all the new stuff, and the worried look on their eyes because they don't know how the bills are going to be paid. I've seen the men at Disneyland that are walking around, and you can just see that they're scared. They're like, I'm here. We're here doing the American thing. How are we going to afford this whenever we get home? And so wisdom comes into that too. Let's turn to Colossians chapter 3. For us to be content, we need to be grateful. We need to be thankful. We need to have that continual mindset of like, wow, God, you have done so much for us. Colossians 3:15 says, let the peace of God rule in your hearts, to that which you are called in one body, and be you thankful. Chapter 4 and verse 2, it says, continue in prayer and watch in the same with thanksgiving. In 2 Corinthians, Paul gives a statement about thanksgiving too in 2 Corinthians 9. And I like the way he put it here. It's very simple, but it's beautiful. Second Corinthians 9:15. Thanks be unto God for his unspeakable gift. That's beautiful. Like here, Paul is telling us that the gift is so great that the thanks aren't even enough. Because it's unspeakable. We can't speak about how great it is, and the thanks that we can give for it will never match what the gift is. I won't turn there, but Psalm 118:29 says, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. There are over 30 psalms alone about being thankful or grateful. That was a major component of David's life. And we also know him as one who had a very obvious issue with covetousness. But he was the man after God's own heart, and he had a heart of gratitude. And of course, even in that circumstance where Nathan showed him where he was afar off, he capitulated. Let's turn back to Philippians chapter 3 again. I think here Paul is expounding a little bit more on that matter that I touched on briefly in 2 Corinthians. But in Philippians chapter 3, I start in verse 7. But what things were gained to me, those I counted loss for Christ. Yea, doubtless I count all things but loss for the excellency of the knowledge of Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and do count them all but dung, that I may win Christ, and be found in him, not having my own righteousness, which is of the law, but that which is through the faith of Christ, the righteousness which is of God by faith, that I may know him, the power of his resurrection, the fellowship of his sufferings, being made comfortable unto death, if by any means I might attain the resurrection of the dead. I like Paul's sentiment here. I don't need anything but Christ, is what he's really saying. I count all things loss, but for the excellency of the knowledge of Christ. And I count it all dung. How tied are we to the things we own? To the person we are, the identity that we have, the things that we desire? Are we so tied to those that we're not grateful for Christ? Because if any of those things stand in front of him, we're not. If any of those things are improper, we're in the wrong deal. Like I read in Colossians, or actually I don't think I read that. In Colossians 3:5 it says, put to death therefore the components of your earthly nature, immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. So again, as Christ put, thou shalt not covet what is of your neighbors in the Ten Commandments, he was also stating very clearly that covetousness is idolatry. Covetousness puts anything that we desire improperly in front of the Almighty, and it has no place there. Which of our desires are more important than an eternity with Christ? Which of our desires are more important than his sacrifice? Which of our desires are more important than our brethren and their opportunity to participate in his kingdom and in his salvation? Because we have all seen where an improper actions coming from covetousness tear apart families, tear apart congregations, tear apart communities. Are there any of our desires that are worth that? And the Lord says no. So it's important for us to be content, to be thankful, to be appreciative. As a parent, I sure like it a lot more whenever my kids are appreciative of what happens, and it makes me desire to do more for them. When I was a kid, I liked mystery novels, specifically the Boxcar Children. I was all about those things. Of course, when I was a kid, there weren't near as many of those as there are now, but I think there was 4 or 5 books then. And one year, someone got me a gift for my birthday, and it was the Hardy Boys. And I was not excited about that because I wanted the Boxcar Children. And even though I was young, I remember clearly now that it upset the person who gave it to me, that they could see that I wasn't excited about that. And I feel bad about it. I was a stupid kid. That person never bought me another gift. Still remained a family friend, but never bought me another gift. And I don't blame her. I wouldn't either. And what about when we treat God's gift that way? When God gives us salvation, hope, and faith for eternity, our flesh doesn't want that. And so we do have to fight against it. We have to fight not to be the immature child that can't receive a gift with gratitude. So let our desires be appropriate. We should desire Christ. We should desire things to be better for ourselves, but not at the expense of anyone else. Nor sacrificing the righteousness of Christ in us to do so. Matthew 5, verse 6, in that Sermon on the Mount said, "Blessed are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied." We, as followers of Christ, must be content with our physical and never satisfied with the spiritual that we can get from the Almighty. So I hope you can give that some thought as we consider the 10 Commandments and that 10th one, to work towards aligning our desires with Him and not wanting anything that anyone else has, because we're all on our own paths and He has different purposes for each of us. So let us be content and thankful for the overwhelming blessings that we've received. Let's pray. Our Creator, we truly can't say thank you enough. There's not in our being to express what it is that you have done for us. You've sent your Son. He conquered this world. He destroyed death and comes back to destroy it fully, but He conquered death and He reconciled mankind to you. We are not worthy, but we are blessed to have been called. We thank you for that calling, and we ask you to instill within us a conviction to that calling and a conviction to serve you appropriately and to desire within us the desires of your heart for us and your heart for this world. We love you, we worship you, and we continue this Sabbath day in peace. We ask you to help everyone come back safely next week. Please be with those that are not here and those traveling to and from Dover and all those that we prayed about. We lift all this up in the name that matters on this earth, Jesus Christ, our Messiah. Amen.